Hello, dear Elizabeth Cheney, Miss Liz Cheney, Congresswoman Cheney, and American citizens, American and with and as the complete and hopefully for as long as possible, increasing the identity of volume of humanity's actually manifest and how we are actually manifest, being communicated to by that actually hyper simultaneously recorded. For example, in short, when I was a little kid, when everyone was a little kid, when everyone was little kids, as individuals of the species volume as it actually is manifest, the species body of individual bodies. And with all exceptions in exception nature, we are forced to be grouped bodies, locations, ages, areas, sexes. The ancients interpreted this. There are proofs it is more practical and more probable to convict simultaneously or to opine or theorize that the ancients had revealed the republic for which we stand before the sciences, therefore humanity individually grouped and together became tactically, criminally foreign influenced through defenses of themselves per a method that tricked, hurt, forced, persuaded countries A through Z to to defend themselves as fact cheap nature needed to counter the real causes of negative value nature progressions acts in natures at all locations, and or needing to have that the roles with the real causes of negative value nature progressions acts in natures through other ulterior ones simultaneously employed to keep arrays of opinions, natures, needs, convictions, syntactically manifest how the laws that used colonization remotely and that use states' roles with its entrenched, syntactically increasingly conjunctive and hyperconjunctive as see when people want to say, oh, hyperconjunctive and take everything we say about what's conjunctive, that which is actually discernible. So, for example, we want to have natural relationships with, especially with other sex, for the reasons of generation. They have, they have all exceptions, exception nature employed as an identity theft, fraud, slander method. They have multi-front. There are things that are more motivations than money with fentanyl. These subjects treatments parted. Everyone's leaving out. One of the things that is commonly against every non distinctly, where every American, every colonist, every Native American before that and sustained through that, which had to hide from the past too, because nature increasingly demonstrates the increasing value of to logic of that predicate acts delivery system method, singular, that criminal and citizens delivery system method, singular, where all identity of the ground locations before our founders were even born, before the founders of modern countries A through Z were even born. The sciences had already been forced tricked. Uses of the sciences, uses of human fact cheap in nature, had already been forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded to use the foundation of knowledge, for example, and of that being how to interpret, just like we types into a computer or a calculator and it sorts out the answers. Consciousness identity has means, in other words, we see what is positive and negative simultaneously to itself because the identity of the hyper simultaneous to discern that per definition of hyper-simultaneous, where there are distinct identities of simultaneous. Male and female are distinctly the human species identity of body. Male and female are distinctly mother and father simultaneously. Other species are manifest this way. So, in other words, this breaching method knew that syntactically modern countries would defend themselves, the phenomenon of modern countries and of some ancient countries before this, as only remembered, told, simultaneously defending what's research. So when people would if people would try to speak up against things like slavery, in other words, it was against the law, unless you're going to do it in contexts that were monitored by the countries individually grouped and together being used remotely as colonization. Now, so we could see self-valued with theater treatments of integrity per a distinct identity of criminal insidiousness, that the voices of the branches individually grouped and together are as victims and as hyper victims, but as victim predators and as hyper victim predators syntactically. For example, it must have been when I was in second or third grade, could have been fourth grade. When a girl approached me one time at Webb House, now they changed the name of it. They should have left it Webb House. They left out how, for example, that's where George Washington had to come to counter-extort to an extent that which was involved with slavery, North and South, sickly distinctly, relevant to where and how they would make subject treatments. In other words, witch trials were saying psycho too. Now, we don't know who made that, if they made that up. One of the reasons we don't know, but one of the things we know is that the database relationships were criminally foreign influence. They were involved with an identity theft, fraud, slander method that forced, manifest only capable of being forced, tricked, hurt, persuade, otherwise will steal your identity, attach you to fake words anyway, at all locations. And they're still doing this. So in other words, I had means to sense it when I was a little kid one time at Webb House. A former Mayor Gold's daughter and her family and neighbors and executive police families, O'Brien, they were involved with coordinating times on and off campuses, behind my back and behind others people's backs, and in their faces through other apparent motivations, natures, needs, interests. All kinds of criminally foreign influenced evidence, data, and perception and identity reception racketeering. And uses of, for example, how people say, oh, that they're crazy. And they say, oh, well, this, and then you're using evidences, but you're and time treatments at courts, as they've done at all locations. Everything is, now these are how they are kept with overt criminal enterprises, plural, private ones, and the interbranch kept needing to hide the same sequence of how they get away with it too, because there's an insidiousness of people A through Z with their opinions and convictions relevant to where and how they are victim predators came through schools, that unconnected schools have connections that were made by the breaching method that used all the natures of corruption, not just to screen itself, because that's all natures of other apparent motivations, natures, needs, interests. And that's, and even further, so that's self further, screening themselves with themselves used to the screen, the breaching screen, relevant when people make opinions about the when they make opinions about the figures in American history, like 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I don't know who made that phrase up, that sentence up. But we know the databases were criminally foreign influence, and they were putting theater. They were lying, incapable of telling the truth about history, because they were using criminally foreign influence, positive treatments, negative treatments, and identity treatments simultaneously in collusion /S with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and that insidiousness of people A through Z, because it's propagated. Denials of the needs for relief that are simultaneously more means than there are people in New York City to to overcome the problems like that, vertically and horizontally, and or to make and or to be to make the instant. In other words, if we sense things down on positive value nature progressions everywhere at once, and people are needing to hide finite the value of finite truth and value of sequence as it actually unfolded. So when I was in Web House years ago, a girl approached me. I was able to sense, which I could now prove recorded. And in other words, a girl I would have loved to know in real life without this game that they forcing boys and girls and men and women of each age to roles with. They force, trick, hurt, persuade, other subjects treatments, even like wars, even with isms. Also, where and how emotions and motivations narratives are overtly communicated, having been employed to screen, you know, those revelations that come from when people need to use words like colonization. They're attached with conspiracy. People, they say that people make conspiracy theories, and they've been fabricating conversations to do that. It has been so long that all formal locations, all private, tied to them, even medical campuses, even fire campuses and their family members, show needs, means to hide what's actually recorded. For example, the branches of government individually grouped and together used remotely, pretending not to realize exceptions when they say, "Oh, this is evidence of this." Oh, well, let's make a jury figure it out. In context where we're simultaneously offensively preventing the value of sequence truth, the value of how there has been coordinated between unrelated campuses, even public and private campuses, even uses of homeschool and their family members simultaneously at instances. So, because these are increasingly courts and police forms, just like the ocean is increasingly a problem with plastic. Even if we stop the plastic from going into the ocean now, it's still breaking down, without which went in there forever. Because no one was manning the post of, quote, practical reason. Use a phrase of Immanuel Kant, but using it for the dictionary meaning /S. And we'll see that overtly / insidiously being and having been influenced effectively. There's a degradation of integrity / integrities, specifically to have other pretended by employments off the records, employments by the breaching method, that other natures of employments were juxtaposed with. and as. So even the people, so people are only allowed to hear opinions that stay cattle herded into political bases, because that is measured and maintained by the breaching method effectively maintains criminal insidiousness natures of uses of the names at all locations, areas, and states. And that increasingly forces, no matter how powerful a leader could get, they have to entertain where and how people make and made already criminal insidiousness natures of positive and negative treatments and as names treatments, like behavior. Behavior can't help but be temporary positive, increasingly as value, but it is simultaneously, you know. So in other words, there are people with local 230, and there is former director of the FBI Robert Luskin, and our co-defendants of his, Thaddeus Grabowski, John LeConte, and Dominic Leveriato, and there are neighbors of his, like a Eric Jensen, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed through time, having been involved with houses on and off to Hangdog Lane, with sequence shifts, and with evidences planting at locations, where and how also they make fake sides, because there is also involved people on off the colleges and uses of connections for how roles with identity thefts and frauds against strangers, that the mayor's kids and that people influenced by methods and natures of racketeering by directors of agencies of state police, retired and standing, their roles with the police forms, foreign and domestic military associated with the fire departments and the police conjunctions, their intercampuses conjunctions, their neighbors, their sense and sensibilities, use Jane Austen's phrase, per the definition of it by the dictionary, not leaving out the breaching method, not separating what slavery was in the books simultaneously while witch trials were in the books per the narratives, and with the narratives by what the Mayflower was about, what colonization was about, what Native American rights were and are about, distinctly, not distinctly, and simultaneously, because this is relevant to what is hyper simultaneously is hyper native pure. The Native Americans want, need, and would express, and more than express, tell you, they are prevented means to afford, no matter how powerful any one tribe or individual could get, an identity of the ground's relationship to itself, that our human volume, therefore our human volume science, really needs as per fact treatment nature. Because there is an identity theft, fraud, slander method that set up the suburbs, for example, since before our founders were born, with no cars. Set up for those laws that could be used all locations remotely, so it could sense and discern if someone's going to speak up about any of the crazy laws against anyone, which is satanic and behavior manifest. No. While they're pretending to be able to speak for behavior or emotions. Emotions are about the simultaneous, and that doesn't leave out the slightest finite detail. And so that does not leave out the importance of sequence truth. And that does not leave out the importance of how little kids could sense roles with where and how times increasingly the stewards of jobs as told to be. No, as part of that political base, because there's an insidiousness with the opinions of people A through Z that speak for what Americans or people of states and even of schools think dishonestly for themselves and about themselves and about their emotions and passions and motivations because they're leaving out the other people involved with those instances because they're leaving out how they've been planting, saying things, and having things said made up, and there are recorded how overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and the interbranch family members and their neighbors, where our roles consciously haven't been forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, and worse. Also unknowingly, but not, but to extents they can't be honest about because they already went into professions as the three branches of government, exception, nature tied to them. And tied to that, even the people that work, for example, for the private places associated with the interbranch as exceptions to them. In other words, the people with the prisons are also involved on off the state prison offices and the locations next to it as victim reactions where those reactions were are used and non-reactions, while simultaneously pretending they heard anyone speak for integrity or for the law or for the nature of the law or for the nature of identity, let alone the law's identity, honestly. So no one could speak it, hear it, honestly, no one could be it. So, in other words, there are people, that girl is also involved have made fake exceptions pretending to know me, but with people involved with science classes and recorded criminally foreign influence uses of class placements, you know, that were both, so in other words, a whole bunch of things were confessed, recorded, demonstrated, confirmed by people through time that you don't know, but they'll make an instance this year. They'll make an instance that we walk by, someone will say, something, and since they were kids. So now, for example, Eric Jensen, said that Mike Pandolf, and that confessed, demonstrated, record, confirmed. They all did separately in different ways. I don't know Mike Robert. I barely ever had words with him. The only exceptions were our recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with interstates, with people leading up to and in the World Trade Center attack, therefore leading up to and in wars. Also, the investigators of it, also on off, even medical campuses and fire campuses, roles with offensive database reception and racketeering, identity theft, fraud, slander, and physical delusions, um, metaphysical delusions, increasingly active, progressive, and identity delusions, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, themselves being and having been employed to keep self-value with identity treatments, styles of fact treatment nature of names uses treatments, including with the theory of relativity. See, we have theories offensively affront to the identity of the simultaneous to the extent we know, we can discern. And if we use the value of that which is simultaneous, we discern that identity of volume as value as nature / nature as value. That is its own. See, each identity of volume has a distinct identity of relationship to itself. So as does the identity of a person distinctly from their physical person and distinctly from the mixture of that. And so increasingly we are prevented a quality of fact treatment nature per complete remote possession over roles with as fact, human nature, quality, logic, and defenses of it. Therefore, premises treatment, the value of sequence treatment, the value of simultaneous, the value of people's behavior treatments. You guys are offensively preventing people from calm means to defend ourselves from identity theft, fraud, slanders, since we are little kids. Now they have all natures of corruption because they have recorded uses of how they are shown needs and means to discern how that their locations interbranch, individually grouped and together. Every person that works there, all exception nature are in demonstration the same thing too, which simultaneously demonstrates that and how also they are conscious, everyone. See, they are kept needing to hide the same sequence shift, finite, active, progressive lies with individuals, groups, like criminal enterprises, private ones, times, roles with uses of the corners of the streets on Griswold Street, having been influenced from off that location, including as people recorded involved with time uses of on off the state judicial branch offices through time, all along Route 3 involved with these identity theft, fraud, slander method against everyone. And they're having people pretend that others make conspiracy theories if we blame things correctly, because they've been using cases to fabricate things to cover up where and how all locations are being and haven't been used remotely. So in other words, there are a whole bunch of means to record this. The corners of the street, the families, therefore the names of the houses on Church Street are recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders against me, not even knowing me. And they'll tell you this as people involved with, if they, with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and with various natures of federal criminals since before they got caught, who also have been timing the roles with the people who work for the schools and people who work as the schools, like, distinctly, not distinctly, and simultaneously, including with the resource officers, including per uses of their family members through time, intercampuses involved, painting fake things in the databases. There are kids I never saw in my middle school in my life who pretended other with the police forms who had a quick second of pretending other. When I never knew them before that or after that. They were doing that because of how they have the families that work at the state judicial branch offices lied to so they could keep them self-valuing. It wasn't their fault. Where and how they are knaves, for example, with all data reception, sequence reception, simultaneous values reception. Now, these are also people rules of wire crime acts and methods through time connected with military families that are also involved with forging and switching names with the interbranch that have been doing this. So forgiveness is not to give up, but forgiveness is to get through people pretending they could speak about or spoke about the law. For example, Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN are recorded, forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded to have faith in names dishonestly, incapable of defending what they know. They know though that faith is being and having been exploited. Where it comes to the roles with jobs and employments, it means to make positive value nature progressions, where nature is still increasingly demonstrating negative value, the real causes worst of and maintained at all locations, areas, and states of negative value, the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts and natures, acts like predicate acts, natures like criminal insidiousness natures, wrongdoers, criminal and seditious natures of positive or negative treatments, motivations, narratives. With January 6th, there's a former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, in his defendant capacities, involved also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed with other directors, also with Fred Grisey, and with people who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed by a Spada family involved with a bunch of boyfriends of sisters, and of one of them in particular, who is recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with men and women of the medical community that have badges, who on and military too, etc. All private tied to them. We're used to, all socially neighbors, all along Ridge Road in Weathersfield, and all along the routes conjunctive to it, like Wells Road, all the way from the Church Street in the corner of Main Street, that goes right by between where George Washington had to leave slavery entrenched. It had to counter extort that, rolls with it, to rolls with and as rolls to win the American Revolution against England, which was only one part of all parts still, including England being and having been used remotely by that which wrought modern nations as victim predators, shock and awe. No, quote, shock and awe, but using it dictionary definition. Proper. And so criminally foreign influence readings of statutes were and are evidence /S. Now, these aren't evidences on paper, but see, these type of evidences are being prevented from being used per the crime method. There was also a Luigi Guerrera. I never had verbal conversation with him in my life. There's a Bryant College, and there's a college in Johnson and Wales in Rhode Island that is involved with some state police in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, with the FBI also, and with news media predicate acts, also with the child abuses principles proven and further recorded. Now, so where they are victims, this is prevented from being spoken, so they could lie about the behavior and the motivations of others when they try to report things at schools, because they have collusions with it, because they have uses of it, where and how they have complete possession of each age's interactions with each other, while simultaneously them lying about why and how they had interactions with others, and increasingly self-valuing how being presented means and needs to hide their motivations with that. So there are people on off Trinity College and on off Central Connecticut State University that are recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, having been involved also on off election spots with and on off the campus, planting evidences, predicate acts rules, and with computer people and ones with badges involved with this database. A database is part of the method. So, in other words, there are recorded functions, criminal functions, by where and how the intelligence community associated with locations like Main Street in Old Weathersfield, Church Street in Old Weathersfield. They're involved with identity thefts and frauds, with that little witch trials placed and how conjunctive to it, even if made up, because it was told as true to our students. And so, for example, there was also a Leahy family that has been with the houses next to the campuses, stacking identity thefts and frauds, faked responses to a whole bunch of people that have roles with a whole bunch of distinct natures of abuses of kids and of elderly and of uses of that. They have roles with scams with the Social Security, Medicaid, those all the exceptions, the exception nature, not as the campuses locations. Don't forget medical campuses, fire campuses, private, public. This is connected between that. And they're always hiding what came first with behavior. And it's always recorded consciously. In other words, that girl knew, and her family, to an extent. They don't, so they value not being able to hide that, but by no one will be able to know what I figured out. And could show, actually record it. So, in other words, all kinds of medical corruption, and that, for example, is a subject that's a whole bunch of subjects, but it is an individual subject that is also gets away with it because it has nothing to do with that corruption is maintained because it was already employed at other locations, areas, ages, for needs, where and how locations where the sciences and the identity they share are is manifest. This is what we can use to discern the difference between a physical delusion, a metaphysical delusion, and or an identity delusion. I never had a conversation about delusions with doctors. I'm not a doctor. Since founding, regular people have had the ability to discern the physical delusions and remote uses of the of criminally foreign influence fact treatment nature simultaneously, delusions raw, of doctors of psychiatry and of mental health, and of where and how also the judicial branch, the executive branch, and the political branches had individually and have individually grouped in together roles with that. So note, increasingly incapable of being able to afford the revelations of how, where, and what, how, and why actually the three branches of government and exception nature as presented and communicated by nature, how it is actually manifest. So it is a complete conjunction, is a to our syntax nature. Simultaneously, it is a complete hyper-conjunction to itself, and as itself, as everything, distinctly, not distinctly, and simultaneously, as itself, also further hyper-simultaneously. For example, with the value, within as the value of sequence truth before the order of the finite now, as for example, the smallest finite detail treatment regarding the value, therefore the identity, because value is used properly, told and taught to discern identity, its identity of relationship to itself, and the value again to that which is conjunctive to everything. For example, as needs to discern the hyper-simultaneous distinctly from the distinct identities of sequence / simultaneous nature we are, as this human volume science that the breaching method effectively employed, as science's tactical ulterior from it, therefore to make positive negative treatments, value treatments, increasingly which is simultaneously increasingly identity treatments, title treatments, low grounds of voicings. The ground teaches us other about the identity of what positive and negative and electrical engineering is about. I am not an electrical engineer. That and how a battery could operate an engine and going electrically and go in the air shows that it's not ground as ground literally referred to where and how. For example, we could observe hyper hyperphysical conjunctions to the physical that are greater than and more finite than the value of the identity of physics, while being the identity of the value of physics, for example. So you guys are speaking about behavior as like and dishonestly, because you've only heard it dishonestly spoken about because of the cattle herding and the intellectually with premises to subjects treatments, the value of finite details. One can't speak about the economy honestly, any economy, if we don't understand how those economic value treatments, syntax treatments simultaneously, fact treatment, that can't be understood unless we understood how, in other words, the only reason that was entertained by the early states is because everyone was forced counter-extorted to be part of the narratives of what really led up to the American Revolution and what really led up to and is the value of them having had said and them having said, get the Constitution unabridged. That's what's communicated to us. If we want to take an honest interpretation of the intentions of our founders, then we seek an honest interpretation of our nature that does not leave out the slightest finite detail and or nor the value of it, and it doesn't leave out the motivations, natures, needs, interests, and names, and things from off campuses locations and from off all locations that are relevant where and how people say things real, made up, and made up for everyone too, at all locations increasingly. So it has, in other words, Chris Walters, if he's alive or not, I don't know. Because you can't go by what these people say. I don't know him. And he recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed he was forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded to make exceptions pretending other with people on off Central Connecticut State University that had been involved with names at all the campuses I went to since intercities, planting fake roles with narratives behind and uses of the information planted into databases, the defenses of people with techniques. What they call, there are techniques not that are other than what they, and they have motivations for using them other than they're pretending. So there's a Jamie Carone, a Mark Carone, and a Kevin Carone. I don't know if they're related, but all three of them recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed also with a Mark Violet and a Danielle Perrone. They're involved with abuses of her, where they were forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, also not realized, made roles with identity theft, fraud, slanders, with evidence crimes too, and remote uses of their roles with the intelligence community intercities, and with the colleges and universities with a whole bunch of other countries have what for example they've only referred to identities of relationships to their ourselves as this human volume silence they've only heard wrong. In other words, so these are people that there are people from Rocky Hill campuses that there's a girl, she's a pretty girl I never had. She's another one who's one of the ones I wanted to communicate with. I never was around her. And I walked by her to know who she was, influenced by other people. Just to remember, because this is the people that I caught involved with the child abusers and with this, and with the uses of the family members, the leaders of the schools, and of the parents involved who had identity theft, frauds, instances, roles, also with as federal rules of evidence as crimes, nature of identity theft, fraud, slanders, sequence shifts that were also relevant to where and how there is recorded, consciously communicated awareness of roles, preventing anyone from speaking for how, and using evidences for how, which is three simultaneous things, for example, where and how Native American rights are sickly, distinctly the victim from our own. And hyper additionally, Americans claim black. And hyper additionally, differentially, especially critically, every physical difference, every metaphysical difference, every identity difference simultaneously with that. Now we're not being able to speak about the simultaneous, but through a filtered appearances too now. And so defenses of abridged qualities of science of name of their names, therefore also too relevant where and how the names are used for premises. Don't have to read the theory of relativity to understand it has physical delusions juxtaposed with criminally foreign influenced fact, human nature, qualities, aspects, and natures, for where and how the value of it is manifest, where we have, quote, experts, unquote, at all locations, areas, and states everywhere the body is, defending their positive and negative treatments, their fact, human nature, qualities, aspects, that as needs and natures increasingly reliant upon, and criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments and of negative treatments being and having been in collusion /S, like charities maintain multi-front roles to keep the evidences stacked upon New York City, upon every city, sickly distinctly too. So we can't get how sickly distinctly even our identity, the ground locations that have nothing to do with physical culture, and the human culture, as the human culture, as that which is hyper additional to itself. And it only stays that which is multiplication nature, or division nature /S, or that which is, that's only exceptions, the exception nature and demonstration of the same thing /S, such as that which is negative is. See, our founders wanted us and need us. We want to interpret them honestly. They wanted and needed us to understand where and how little kids have the ability to understand phrases like criminal insidiousness and nature. How nature could only, there are, as an exception, there are things that nature won't be. And people say, oh, how would it be if it wasn't natural? It's only natural as criminal insidiousness. So better than how a computer works, there's the only increasing value of the hyper simultaneous. For example, the value of being able to discern the distinction, to be able to discern other conjunctive, distinct identities of simultaneous nature. How males and females are manifest is in demonstration of, the hypergenesis. That is the only increasing value of our means to use what nature is going to show positive value nature progressions at acts and natures with the, in other words, our founders left us to explain how a breaching method employed means to cause positive value nature progressions acts and natures that were tactically and hyper tactically criminally foreign influenced, and roles and natures as that they knew would self-value themselves further, self-defended, self-cultivated, being have been propagated as fact human nature, criminally foreign influence, simultaneously, tactically delusions wrought. And hyper tactically, because again, now we have motivation. Oh, well, my motivations, I was selling a lot of drugs. When they catch these only some of the people with psychiatry, they have physical delusions. They have a list of mental illnesses designed so they can look at you dishonestly, lie about what came before that, and attach everyone to fake conversations. They're not supposed to look in medical databases. And they're tied to not just to prisons. They're tied not just to schools. They're tied not just to companies originally and still. They left out where and how we were forced to entertain narratives regarding values as known, as the value of job, for example. Of course, people don't have dignity as a job. You have no dignity as a job. Other ways. Oh, well, which was better? You guys leave out exception nature. So it is employed against locations. It's easy to get a company and a whole industry to defenses of fact, human nature, quality, styles, leveraged against those, leveraging against that nature, necessary to be able to counter as fact, human nature, the real cause properly, the real causes of negative value nature progression acts, natures at all locations, areas, and states, acts like predicate acts, natures like criminal insidiousness, natures, wrongdoers, wrongdoing itself. As identity of the ground, conjunctions, increasingly valuable to where and how we are, a value/value progression, actually. So the sciences share the value of the four directions, the value of the XY axis, the value of parabola relative to this, because the identity of relativity is there to discern as a science. And it comes with the identity of hyperrelativity, how it is further distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper-simultaneously a relationship to itself where it is not, and how it is not juxtaposed with physics as life, as a quality of diffusion, where and how the hyper-simultaneous is positive to all parts of itself as space/existence, but then further, especially positive to and as Earth's value, or it is forced from here, if and where and how it's as a special value is not used, because it is only increasing value. And value is used to discern relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. So the parabola, for example, is used to discern that which is hyper-additional to and as the value of the XY axis, which is increasingly valued distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper-simultaneously as an identity of the grounds, identity relationship to itself, and the value of that, which is where and how we can discern the invisible/hyper-invisible and its distinct, non-distinct, and hyper-simultaneous relationship to itself, and how it can and will and is the means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures and means out of nowhere, evolutions, fruits, and gifts. Or to force it from here, Leith of Hadith, as Earth's exception, as Earth's a special difference in relationship to its perfect value progression, where it's going to stay positive onto all parts of space nature, and then further especially positive, where and how it can make more of an extent of complete possession over all parts of space/existence by making smaller temporary parts of existence the same way computers work, because computers have to mimic reality's reality and the increasing value of that. Again, in demonstration of the identity of the hyper-simultaneous. See, identity sees value, and value sees identity and its relationship to itself and the value of that. But now, through systems tactical ulterior from one that causes positive value nature progressions, acts, natures. Tactical ulterior from the one that simultaneously causes positive and negative value nature progressions and demonstration of it. So being tactical ulterior from it, and as styles, roles, needs, natures, defending that's having been employed for what everyone missed. Everyone wants to also hierarchical corruption and simultaneous, the lower ranking FBI and police forms. So Weathersfield police chief, by his own police and by intimate and family ties to them through time, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, other than they could allow, where their communications are actually being and haven't been actually manifest as value. So there is nonverbal communications, there are communications, and there are hyper communications. And what is hyper communicated about regarding what we are actually capable of discerning evidentially, truly, with no theory, regarding the impositions upon New York City, for example, where it is most overtly, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, every American is a victim, and having blamed other things, others ourselves, wrongly, the way the breaching method knew, then too that would be defended. So too simultaneously with styles of. So every time you make a positive or negative treatment, you're making an identity treatment. So the identity of physics, the identity of trigonometry, the identity of algebra, those identities, they see the value of the XY axis. Because the identity of all directions at once, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, is manifest as the only increasing value of an identity is not completely as, but is while completely as the value of the four directions. Earth's a special difference here. It's great. But what generated everything? Because we're supposed to write from the part left out of the first part of the Old Testament. And we are not supposed to go about, all we have to know is that first part right in the beginning of it. Offensively. For example, as evidence. So until where and how they've been getting away with preventing people's religious rights by the collusions that the medical community, for example, through psychiatry. People say, oh, mental health. That they have all kinds of celebrities and sports stars involved dishonestly pretending to be about mental health, involved at locations, areas, and states where people um, have roles calling in police and themselves, police forms themselves, putting fake things in databases, speaking, having people act fake things at locations to hide what I caught them doing off the youngest ages of campuses. So you see videos on TV sometimes people doing mean things to kids and the groups and the nature of that. There is maintenance to where and how. Countries that like each other and don't, where they share campuses here, all that, they have an agenda that's off the table. They don't even understand because everyone's been used remotely. Fake sophistication, faked, quote, free at last, quote, Reverend King. Boxing. Science is sharing identity, the identity. So boxing, martial arts, and wrestling share the identity of grappling, inseparable from their rules, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously relevant to this. They share how that it is mixed with martial arts, striking and grappling. Grappling is tried to be forced out, but you can't help it. And if one person's doing it a little bit, another person, and you can't, stop it. And some, styles versus styles. People always say styles make fights. Good fights to watch. People who like to watch boxing, they're watching details that other people aren't paying attention to. People who like to watch football. They're watching details other people don't pay attention, even if it's only because they bet money. That's the detail. That they know differently than other people. The entertainment becomes, and all the best things come from where and how we are individuals of a species body, individual, hyper additional to itself. It's the species body here must train. So in other words, at all locations, areas, and states, both parties, but the word politics takes itself. We use, but is actually recorded, being having been used by both parties. With physical delusions used remotely. Applied where and how it is relevant. There are other motivations, natures, needs, interests that anyone could afford discerned honestly where and how we are interacting with ourselves at instances. And they keep connecting uses of that. So it has something to do with like how Tim O'Brien would walk around the community and go on walks and have conversations with people, and how the intelligence community has roles with houses and businesses and exceptions like a post office and things tied to their and the interbranch where and how with people A through Z with their opinions, convictions, positive and negative treatments. Since you guys were speaking about the Mayflower or attacking it wrong, this makes counters to this makes problems and made and kept problems to keep counters to it also employed, to keep employed arrays and lists of names employed against every other name, and that's self-valued, and selves against selves, because at instances they're planting people, investigators, They are being had in their campuses. They're already being and haven't been used remotely. So if anyone tries to speak about the history properly, there are identities that they don't know. If they try to say they don't know, maybe there'll be exceptions and they mix it up. They'll start on Facebook. They'll do it even. It's already recorded. Are with the courts and the police forms where they were used remotely. You guys are being used remotely, for example. So, and how you self-value roles with the sequence shifts. There's a guy that looks just like James Comey, even if it wasn't James Comey. New Britain Superior Court was as involved with James Comey criminally and with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, at locations planting evidences, including involved with as the evidence. They had used remote uses of investigators, identity ground locations like the woods in New Britain, Connecticut, next to Central Connecticut State University, in that skate park there, involved with the police chief, Cintron, and his family and extended family, per the confessions of themselves. They also make confessions about themselves so they can hide and make plant pretended motivations, and simultaneously for on different levels, preemptively, actively, increasingly progressively, that everyone's valuing naive sequence values, finite values, active values, progressive values, and identity values, reception racketeering. Again, worse than racketeering, worse than war crimes, mixed. That's all that is easily discernibly inseparable from topics like black or white, with pupils, for example, and whites of eyes. It is evidence that how such was separated, like the witch trials, from those crazy laws that against distinctly everyone, and playing games with black and white. So, see whites of eyes, see clear, the means appear, proper one way alone. So, honest perception of American history and of America now, you don't leave out the value of understanding where and how and why. Natures of industry, natures of business, and the value of a job is pretended to be what it wasn't for a breaching method. Everyone rolls. Everyone preventing the exception nature to the positive and negative treatments, identity treatments being used to get away with logic that would not have been gotten away with. So Little Rap Guy and Friends have a projects episode /S. And they're involved with, like our founders, there are anti-hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise that began from an archetypal, that began as an anti-archetypal criminal enterprise. But because they didn't understand, see, now Little Rap Guy as Romulus, with Romulus and Remus. See, what he didn't understand at first, what everyone didn't understand was how they had to frame it as a hyper archetypal criminal enterprise. And then there, as modern countries A through Z, as victim predators, self-valued as archetypal criminal enterprises. And then we know transnational criminal enterprises. We know interstate criminal enterprises. And there's that relevant insidiousness A through Z for regarding opinions and regarding their opinions and regarding the value of what others say when we try to use the revelations. and the evidences, where and how we have black pupils and whites of eyes each, and every color treatment has not only the dishonestly regarding their defenses of their logic regarding it, but regarding their motivations by it, and regarding how that is and has been used remotely, because that certain type of victim slash hyper victim predator that everyone recorded effectively how it's used remotely. So there was also one, I do know the name, but it was Daryl Chandler. I don't know Daryl Chandler. He also is with people on the intelligence community, with Main Street and Old Weathersfield, who went out of his way to pretend other as roles with distinct natures of federal crimes with little kids, and as means and as methods that use. His sister is also involved with them, and they have with like there's locations next to a food bag, which is right next to where the Weathersfield Police Department is now, which was involved also with locations where it used to be. No, right off of Church Street. So all along Church Street, all along Ridge Road, the families associated with the Weathersfield Police Chief 1 year ago involved with all kinds of federal crimes at locations that also involved the only allowed to be counters and people helping at locations with instances. And their narratives regarding others, why and how others bring up their names. So that's where, since the youngest ages, we have to address how they already had and have complete, they already have complete possession over unrealized even how it works, complete possession over the intelligence community's uses of locations with our history, as their roles with our uses of our elections locations now. They're differentially playing the bad cop, but they're playing that game, good cop, bad cop. I don't know who made that phrase up. I've seen it through the news media, and so through the arts and through the actual interbranch, and all exception each time, hundreds of countries involved with shared campuses. So there are people with Rocky Hill campuses involved with Luigi Guerrero. I don't know his sister's name. Involved also with teachers I had at Central Connecticut State University, who are involved also intercities through time interstates as victims, but as victim predators with predicate acts relevant and roles and names involved with the World Trade Center, with the Ninth Circuit Court next to it, through their security, etc. They have complete possession over all these styles of defenses of reason that cannot defend itself in us or speak for why and how. Actually, we are bound. So they make people call people names, and they force that, and that's recorded. We could watch this. We could watch what they're doing to the President Trump, what they did to President Obama, sickly distinctly. They're doing it to President Biden now. It's not fun to try to not have allow anyone to speak honestly about the dreams of our presidents / chiefs, and in the context where the Native Americans say that we should read each other's dreams. And we're in the context where if you use science that is actually honest, that is only increasingly value that and how they believe that, because it's also scientifically increasing value that is also positive unto itself, which is losing ways to be our human volume science, that which is native pure. So already the locations of courts and of police locations and programs with the kids, like the Cub Scouts, seeing uses of corruption and roles with that ignored, etc., or attacked wrongly. Not just entrapment or whatever like that. These are keeping only types of leaderships even down to kids counselors, use as roles with uses of all locations, where they're stacking people at other locations and on off the campuses, even to connected identity theft, fraud, slanders instances, and their conjunctions to the judges that forge roles with states attorneys and prosecutors in collusions too as fake arrays, fake middles. So they use the word, they use phrases like hard on crime or soft on crime as roles to play good cop, bad cop. The news media and retired and standing interbranch and military intelligence and advisors to them with physical delusions and self-defending offensively, criminally, foreign influence, positive treatments, negative treatments, causes of them, uses of them, and the motivations behind the roles with that, pretending other. This is maintained outcome /S. Then so in other words, Jennifer Kennepicky, I don't know her mother's name. I don't know how I had communications with her over the phone. That was influenced because she's involved with some FBI, the former director of the FBI, other FBI agents recording leading up to the World Trade Center attack, and since they coordinated things the night before, and it was proven after that they had roles post-dating documents that had been time-stamped and delivered to the court on time, and they post-dated them from inside the court to appear late to the panel of judges next to the World Trade Center, right, towers, plural, right before the attack, /S. Now, these are also people that had forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded people to Saudi Arabia to roles with that girl from the Webb School and with the families along Church Street and Old Wethersfield and all along on Main Street, and it turns into Wells Road and goes all the way to Route 3 and on off Paul Manafort Drive. Now, Paul Manafort Drive /CCSU, Central Connecticut State University. So Central Connecticut State University has police forms involved with the former director of the FBI, state police, a whole bunch of Wethersfield police and military police involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, planting evidence at locations through that need to hide life progressions with as roles with instances had nothing to do with that. So they forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded Danielle Perrone to pretend to see an illusion, to pretend I knew people I don't know, who made fake exceptions to pretend I know as roles that were made also as sequence shift roles, and as their roles with federal rules of evidence as crimes and various natures of child abuses, and roles with juxtaposed distinct natures of criminally foreign influence uses of elderly homes and those spots next to them, next to the community center, for example, uses of the community center. These are also people involved with the programs with the kids, and manifest. I tell it best, boxings. So we have the policing of the schools. We have the leaderships of the schools, the people that work for the schools. We have private insurance companies, their police forms, the programs that came up, their neighbors, where they live, everyone speaking through others. Their investigators have been used remotely originally and still. Then they need to hide nature's demonstration means to demonstrate that. And this method knew that would have to be by these identity ground voicings, only capable of being where and how the means of positive value nature progressions and the means to cause negative value nature progressions are really manifest, and where and how motivations and reception of such is really manifest. I tell us best boxing. So, in other words, I teach us things, species, body, law. It's how it makes more of what can't be unless he uses temporary locations. Just like the computers use microchips. So they can remember all these, so they could afford to have the CPU memory, have, have enough spaces to remember if they were positive or negative, relevant to and as with the value of sequence true as it actually unfolded. Did A become before the B? That's all the computer is doing. In other words, sequence is a value there because the simultaneous is a value. And again, computers are mimicking. The computers have to work because of how we and why we are 1/3/5 identities of sequence nature. And that's just like multiplication nature and division nature is. As exception nature simultaneously being about what exception nature is distinctly for the thing that answers all questions. That identity of hyper-simultaneous, that all individual bodies are semi-nature relationship to it, including the species body. When one part of your body is positive to itself, it is its semi-nature relationship is to and as your complete identity, which is to and as its complete identity. See, this system made fake integrity nature's value the real increasing need to value increasingly the real cause of negative value nature progressions acts in natures at all locations, areas, and states, let alone New York City. So what is actually recorded is the difference between types of campuses is measured and maintained by a breaching method distinctly from our own, from our own, measured and maintained being and having been exploited. There are people associated with Puff Daddy. Puff Daddy, please do it. I know it's hard to do, but please, so you don't have to be further the breaching method between private and public schools. So there's a former director of the FBI named Robert Luskin, who has roles with predicate acts on off Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and they have people with a guy that looked just like you on Vernon Street. No, a dead end, but no, there's a real Vernon Street there. And note how next to Trinity College also, there are two, New Britain Ave has two New Britain Aves. And note how also there's a house with a crow's nest. Not the house they call the crow's nest, but there is a house with two. No, how they call a house with a crow's nest. That is not the house with the crow's nest where they used to shoot the prisoners from. The slaves from. Where and how slavery was left entrenched north and south sickly distinctly by a breaching method that forced and counter extorted the North and the South both to fight against slavery and to get the Constitution unabridged. But the only way they could do that, they could only do that to an extent. We're supposed to now use these words and phrases like the Constitution unabridged and like criminal insidiousness and like identity. To have mandated law where it was not, where it was prevented syntactically at all locations and other was pretended offensively And that was being and is being used remotely through other motivations, nature's needs, interests, motivations, themselves being and having been used remotely. This breaching method knew that nature would demonstrate itself. This is really why and how people won't let people use that which is hyper evidential as evidence, relevant to courts that also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed to me and to others. They pretend people are trying to control conversations, where and how they've been, also offensive data reception, sequence values reception, evidence reception, identity reception, progressive values reception, predators used remotely further as hyper predators too, where and how they've been getting away with it because they only had 3 branches and all the other forms of criminal insidiousness natures to keep leaving, to keep needing to hide the same finite active lies, progressive lies, sequence shifts as styles. At those locations formal, originally they sustained that using it at other locations for other natures of things, other natures of tricks. So they made exceptions. There were proofs. It was communicated to me that there were proofs that if it was only verbally recorded, they did that to record identity theft, fraud, slander, to make it look like I were tied to them. The people with Millwoods Park, for example, involved further with police forms and their uses of their family members with their narratives because they're lying about their motivations. They're bringing in their family members. They don't care about their family members. Oh, but my job, my employment, how am I going to take care of them? They don't care about that where and how they brought them up. In other words, that's a truth used for a lie because where and how we have the hierarchy of the law and its lower, members distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously used distinctly criminally foreign influence by the same method that has everyone else involved with it, has again uses motivations. This method was designed to sense, to discern any body of unity that would try to counter that which was consciously torturing everyone and everything because they want to measure simultaneously where a fact, cheap nature, quality would come from, capable of being one to capable of countering the real causes of negative value nature, progressions, acts, and natures at all locations, areas, and states. The real value of democracy, the real value of the republic. See, the democracy itself and the republic itself is invisible but still discernible. So that's not what leads. Because there was also hyper invisible but still discernible. And that's what answers our questions. That's the value of that's the identity of the computer that remembers every instance. And appreciates the value of sequence true and the simultaneous. Excuse me.